Hello, and welcome to Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. Before we begin, please hit the like button if you like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps so much and I need all the help I can get. You can also join my Patreon. We have a big fundraising goal. We are in the middle of it right now and you can be a part of that. I'll talk more about that at the end of the video. I love spending time in the mountains and in the hills. I'm not a hardcore camp on the ground in a tent camper, more of an RV camper, but I do love it so much, especially as I've gotten older and I've really come to appreciate the peace and quiet the mountains offer. I grew up going fishing and picking pine nuts in the fall and getting loads of wood with my grandparents, and I've spent a lot of time on Cedar Mountain in the last 10 years, hunting and riding ATVs and taking photos, just being in nature. It's always beautiful and always relaxing and serene. Until night falls, you know. Those of you who spend time in the mountains and in the woods know that at night, it's kind of easy to let your mind wander. It's so very quiet. You can hear even small sounds when the air is still and the critters who come out at night are moving around. People in my area, southwestern Utah, talk about skinwalkers and ancient spirits, but that's not really what scares me. I'm only really scared of a couple of things: bears and other people. It's people who do the most damage to other people. And today I have a story for you about one of the worst. I really dislike this guy. He preyed on people who were doing absolutely nothing but trying to enjoy their time in nature, trying to get away from it all and take in the beauty of the hills. And for that, they lost their lives at the hands of this monster. There's also one thing interesting about this guy, and that is that he is very unlike a lot of other serial killers we study, and we'll talk about that at the end of the episode. This is the story of Gary Hilton, known as the National Forest serial killer. I'm your host, Stacy Lee. Let's get into it. Our story begins in the mountains of Tennessee, the area known as Blood Mountain. 24-year-old sales manager Meredith Emerson is taking her day off to enjoy some hiking. She loaded her beloved dog Ella into her car and headed into the National Forest. She parked her car and then she and Ella headed up Freeman Trail on Blood Mountain, which is in Vogel State Park. This was supposed to be a one-day adventure and Meredith was scheduled to return home that evening. She did not. The next morning, when she was still not home, the authorities were alerted and a search began. Very early into the search, witnesses came forward stating that they had seen Meredith the day before on New Year's Day and that yes, she was with Ella, her dog. Some of them also said there was another person that seemed to be either kind of trailing Meredith or with her, staying pretty close with her. The witnesses said this was an elderly man, thin with a thin face, receding hairline, almost bald on top, and a beard. The man also had a red dog with him. Some of the witnesses even said, "Oh, I thought Meredith was with this man. They appeared to be hiking together." For 2 days, police, search and rescue, and volunteers searched for Meredith Emerson, desperately hoping to find her on the trail, maybe injured, waiting for someone to come and find her, help her. The day after the search began, January 3rd, police found Meredith's 1995 Chevrolet Cavalier parked at the trailhead. Inside the car, police found a water bottle, a dog leash, and a police baton that Meredith carried for protection. As word got out that there was a missing hiker and more people realized they'd seen Meredith and that she was with this older man described as thin with a thin face, almost bald, white beard with a red dog, the people who spent a lot of time in the area realized they knew who everyone was talking about. The witnesses were describing this man, Gary Hilton. Gary was well known in the area. He spent a lot of time hiking on Blood Mountain. Police pulled Gary's driver's license photo and began showing it to the witnesses. Yes, they said, that's him. That is the man they saw either following or with Meredith Emerson before she disappeared. The police then went on the news and announced that Gary Hilton was a suspect in this disappearance, and his photo was splashed all over the TV and all over the newspapers. The next day, this call came into 911 dispatch.
Okay, at 911, what's the exact location?
I had this, the person of interest in that missing woman case is at this Chevron gas station on Ashford Dunwoody.
jump around gas station and ask we're done with it?
Yeah.
You said the van is there?
The van is here. The dog is here, the red dog, and I saw the man's face, and I've been watching the news, and I know it's him. He's got a green long sleeve sweatshirt, and he's wearing a hat, and he's emptying all this stuff out of his van. Pillows and a blanket, and it looks like he's got a sleeping bag right now. Taking it all to the trash. It's definitely,
and the dumpster is
looking around like he is as guilty as sin.
Okay, sir, and the dumpster is at the rear of the location?
Yeah, the dumpster, well, it's kind of right in the front. It's right by the car wash.
Okay.
I can go take him down if you want.
No, sir, stay right there.
Okay.
Okay, hold on, sir.
He looks like he's finishing up. You guys gotta hurry. He's got stuff in bags that he's emptied onto the ground, and he's taking load by load to the strip behind the car wash. This is the third backpack we've seen him take to the dumpster. Oh, I'm just shaking. You guys, is there somebody en route?
Yes, sir.
Here we go. Here comes the cops. Yes.
Yes. Police are there?
Yes. Yes. They got him.
They got him?
I mean, they don't have him yet, but they're getting out. So they got him now. Here, 2 cruisers pulled up on him. 2 of the cabs.
On January 4th, 2008, just 3 days after Meredith Emerson disappeared, as you heard in that audio clip, the police captured who they believed to be responsible for her disappearance. Gary Hilton was parked at a gas station, hurriedly going through his vehicle, throwing all kinds of things into a dumpster: blankets, pillows, coats, backpacks. Thank heavens an eagle-eyed resident was watching, was alert, and was willing to do the right thing. Call it in. Thanks to this citizen, the police arrived at the gas station and took Gary Hilton into custody. Once Gary was in custody and they were back at the police station, officers began going through Gary's background while others took him into the interview room where Gary could not shut the hell up.
You liked talking with hairdressers about? Is that?
No. Back in the days when I was running my fraud, unlawful charity.
Right.
And by the way, that's what I fell on in '95.
Right.
It was a charge of unlawful therapy and also a theft charge that wasn't related to that at all. I started working for this book display company. It became disgruntled and stole the stock. At that time, they got the indictment, and they set the Superior Court set a $25,000 bond on me. That went January of '94. Concurrent 5-year probation, did the restitution, and did the probation. Restitution of $540.
So you pretty much got out of the telemarketing.
Oh, no, we got that. That's going back over 20 years ago. No. If you want to work on Saturdays and you're, whether you're selling advertising or whether you're begging, who are you going to call on a Saturday morning? I mean, the argument against that is that the owner's going to be there, but they're going to be so busy that they won't talk to you. Well, that's your average person, not me. Yeah, I get through to the person that answers the phone.
This guy, I need like hypnotherapy to find out where in my life I developed such a hatred for men like this. This guy thinks he is the shit, and he could not be more mediocre, more totally and completely boring and uninteresting and basic. And I don't know what it is. I cannot stand people like this. He is so arrogant. He would talk until his voice gave out. He thinks he is so important and so smart and so interesting and just so much more, aware of reality and what's going on in the world than everyone else. He keeps talking about how everyone else is fooled because they're living in a false reality. And he is aware of what's really going on. He is tuned in because he's just so very special and so much smarter than everyone else. There's something about him that makes my skin crawl. He's reptilian. And that combined with his arrogance and his big ego, I just find him repulsive. Gary Hilton is someone, I have this thing that I say to my friends when I really don't like someone. I'll just kind of turn to one of my friends and say, worth it. And that means I've officially met someone worth spending the night in jail over. Just a punch to the throat or something, maybe a smack upside the back of the head. Nothing too serious. Of course I'm joking, but I would never do anything like that. But you just once in a while you meet somebody where you're like, worth it. Yeah, worth it. Cops start looking into who Gary is, and very quickly they realize they've got a major problem on their hands. Gary was born in 1946 in Atlanta, and when he was just 13 years old, he shot his own father, shot his dad, and his dad refused to press charges. This wasn't an accident, and from what I gather, it wasn't even really a fight. Gary literally just shot his dad. Gary's mother was very angry with Gary, and she kicked him out of the house. But then after a little while, she let him back in. I mean, I'm sure that was a very difficult situation, but there should have been some repercussions. Gary joined the Army in 1964, and then he got married in 1967, but the marriage lasted only 2 years. He married again he divorced. Third time's a charm for many, I get that, but not for Gary. And his third wife left him as well. Gary became a drifter, basically a homeless guy. He had absolutely no success of any kind in life, not professionally, not personally, and then he got into the survivalist lifestyle. Fine, great. The problem with some of these survivalist guys is they steal and they squat on other people's land and they steal from their cabins and things to get by. Gary did that. He got arrested for arson. He got arrested for possession of marijuana, for stealing, for drunk driving multiple times, for drugs, for driving without a license, and for solicitation over 20 times, like picking up hookers. This is someone that thinks, I'm above the laws don't apply to me, I'm special, the rest of you little peons can go to work every day and pay your bills and follow the laws, I don't have to. I don't like this guy. I don't like this guy. The rules apply to everyone. We're trying to have a society here. Gary's just kind of a loser, and to hear him talk, he truly believes he is the smartest guy in the room. But apparently he's not smart enough to hold any kind of a job or have any kind of win in life. And he grew more and more bitter and hateful because with these types of people, it's almost always someone else's fault. It's his mom's fault for kicking him out after he shot his dad. It was the Army's fault for teaching him to kill. It's society's fault for not realizing how special he is. He would go on to say all of these things and more. Anything to avoid taking accountability and owning what he had done that was wrong. So Gary spends a few days in custody after Meredith's disappearance. And then on January 7th, less than a week after she disappeared, Gary agrees to lead the police to her. They want to know what has happened. So Gary begins to tell the story. He tells the police that he ran into Meredith hiking and they talked for a while. Then, unexpectedly, Gary pulled out a knife. He wanted to shock and scare Meredith. It was this knife, to be exact. And Gary told Meredith that he wanted her ATM card along with her PIN number. Meredith fought back. And when I say fought, she fought. Gary said that Meredith screamed and kicked and that he had to hit her so hard it broke his hand. He said she wouldn't stop. She would not stop fighting and yelling at the same time. So I needed to both control her and silence her. Meredith had taken a lot of self-defense classes. And as Gary tells it, he says, she swept my ass.
Then it was a mistake to pick Meredith. Because as you said, she almost swept my ass. You said, didn't you say, I bet that 120-pound girl almost swept your ass? She almost swept my ass. Amen. She damn sure did.
Gary tells the police that after he attacked Meredith on the mountain and they fought, he beat her badly and she was somewhat incapacitated. He then took the side trails down off the mountain so they would not be seen by other hikers. And eventually he got Meredith down the hill and into his van. For 4 days, Meredith toyed with Gary Hilton, giving him wrong PIN number after wrong PIN number, each time claiming that she didn't know why the PIN wasn't working. She was doing everything she could to buy time and stay alive. Ugh. Finally, on January 4th, the same day as the 911 call, Gary had had enough. He unloaded Meredith from his van and tied her to a tree. He told her over and over again to relax and stay calm, that she would be going home. He then returned to his van after Meredith was tied up and went to get himself some coffee. Then he returned to where he had tied Meredith up, approached her from behind, and hit her repeatedly with a car jack handle. He then tells the police that he couldn't bring himself to kill the dog, Ella. Ella would later be found wandering in a Kroger parking lot on that same day, January 4th. This all happened on the same day. After killing Meredith, that's when Gary drives to the gas station and begins cleaning out his van, and that is when he is captured. As Gary told the story to the cops and they drove to the site, the cops got really quiet as they anticipated what they were about to witness. They arrived in the Dawson Forest Management area, and Gary led them to Meredith's remains. I read in an interview with one officer, he said it felt like the hike to the body took forever because he knew what was waiting for him. You see, Gary had told the officers, the head will be missing. Yes, this sick piece of human trash had decapitated this beautiful young woman who fought for her life to stop her from being identified. That was the excuse that he gave. But he left her hands? I don't buy it. I think he decapitated Meredith because he wanted to. I think he's a monster, and I think he's trash. Meredith's family was devastated but gracious and thanked everyone who had helped in the massive search effort. With Meredith found, the police now turned their attention to Gary Hilton. Just who was this very obnoxious, know-it-all weirdo that they had in custody? They interviewed people who knew Gary, and they all described him the same. Odd, a loner, not super friendly, but someone they thought was harmless. But people who knew Gary did point something out. In 2007, they began to notice a change in Gary. One of his friends, a man named John Tabor, a guy that Gary worked with, said Gary turned from, quote, a friendly grandpa to something else, much more sinister. John said that one day, Gary came to work missing a bunch of teeth, and he told John that he'd pulled them out with pliers. Gary's mood became dark, and he seemed to be even more unhappy than he'd been in the past. He actually told John, quote, I like the way I look now with my teeth missing because it scares people. John said he was shocked at some of the things Gary began saying, and at one point, Gary even threatened to kill John. Then a sheriff's deputy found Gary squatting on someone's property. This was in late 2007. He was living there without permission, and Gary told the sheriff, it's okay that I live here. I'm a paratrooper with the Army. The sheriff said he then went to leave, and Gary yelled out, hey, love ya, like he was talking to a family member or something. Just odd behavior. And then police discovered there was much more to Gary Hilton than just odd behavior. There was much, much more. "80-year-old Jack Bryant and 84-year-old Irene Bryant left their home in Horseshoe, North Carolina to go for a hike through the Pisgah National Forest. Jack and Irene were avid hikers even at their age, and they spent a lot of time outside doing what they loved. They parked their Ford Escape at the Yellow Gap Road and headed into the mountains. Several days went by, and then a week, and then 2 weeks. Family members began talking amongst themselves, and they realized none of them had heard from Jack or Irene for far too long. The couple was reported missing, and the Henderson County Sheriff's Office immediately launched a search. More than 30 volunteers, a helicopter, and cadaver dogs began to look for the missing couple. The police pulled Jack's cell phone records and saw that on the day they disappeared, the 21st, Jack attempted to call 911, but the signal was lost in the middle of the call, and the call dropped. The search continued for weeks, and then on November 10th, 2007, the search party found a partially decomposed body on the Barnett Branch Trail. Someone had attempted to cover it with leaves. The body was sent to the state medical examiner, who determined that yes, it was Irene Bryant. Little 84-year-old Irene Bryant had been bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. The police then discovered that someone had used the Bryant's ATM card and withdrew $300 from an ATM in Duxtown, Tennessee. They immediately pulled the surveillance images from that ATM, and they showed that an older man used the card. The man was wearing a yellow rain jacket, and he had the hood pulled down over his face. It was impossible to see his facial features. Irene was declared a homicide victim, and because the murder took place on federal land, the FBI became involved, offering a $10,000 reward to whoever provided information leading to the killer. Police continued to search for Jack, and on February 3rd, 2008, they found him. A hunter named Mark Waldrop discovered a skull in Nantahala National Forest, just off the service roads called the Switchbacks. Mark called the police, who arrived at the location, and in addition to the skull, they found a pelvis and a spine within about 20 yards. There was no clothing left to examine and no identification near the bones, so they were sent to the medical examiner in Chapel Hill. 2 days later, the ME identified the remains as belonging to John Bryant. Now the police knew they had a double murder on their hands. Who had so viciously attacked and killed this elderly couple out for a hike? In the midst of the Bryant investigation, this woman, 46-year-old Cheryl Hodges Dunlap, went missing on December 3, 2007. Cheryl lived in Crawfordville, Florida, and she taught Sunday school at a church in Tallahassee. That Sunday, she didn't show up to teach her class, and that was completely out of character for Cheryl. Her family immediately reported her missing, and the police began to search for her. They found her abandoned car, a white Toyota Camry, located just north of the county line. The search for Cheryl continued for 5 days, with around 200 people helping to look for her. Then on December 16, 2007, a hunter named Ronnie Rentz was walking through the woods in the Appalachian National Forest with his dogs. He was horrified to discover the headless, decomposing body of a woman. I mean, I don't know how many of you spend time in the hills. I know maybe that's something you don't think about. Maybe there's something wrong with me, but I do think about that kind of thing. Can you imagine you're just walking along on a hike or a walk and you stumble upon this horrific sight? It's very disturbing. The body was sent to the medical examiner, who used DNA profiling to confirm the identity. The body belonged to Cheryl Dunlap. Witnesses came forward and said they saw a green truck kind of patrolling the area when Cheryl disappeared. One man came forward and he had more details. He said that he had noticed a 2001 green Chevy Astro van, not a truck, and he remembered seeing this because the man behind the wheel gave him the creeps. You and me both, witness, you and me both. Police then discovered that a man had tried to use Cheryl's ATM card 5 times in Tallahassee and had been successful in withdrawing $700 from her account. And this is the part where we need to talk about the mask. As if this was not cabin in the woods style horror film enough, Gary Hilton put on this horrifying mask to go to the ATM. I don't know if he used it once or 5 times, but this is the mask that he used. It's horrifying. And why isn't there anyone around thinking like, I mean, maybe he went to a desolated ATM. I don't know. But can you imagine seeing somebody at an ATM withdrawing money and they're wearing this mask? Knowing my nosy ass, I would follow them and like get the cops on the phone and maybe get killed myself. You know, that's about my speed. But truly, can you imagine? It's at this point in time that law enforcement departments kind of began to talk to each other. And rumors began to fly that there is a serial killer in the area operating between Georgia, Tennessee, and Florida. Well, the rumors were true, but sadly, they didn't know who the killer was or how to find him. And then Meredith was taken and killed in January of 2008, and Gary was taken into custody. So cops began asking Gary about these other cases, and then they tied him to more. These have not yet been proven, but in 1997, 51-year-old Judy Smith was found in Pisgah National Forest. In 1998, 20-year-old Jason Knapp, a Clemson student, disappeared and was never found. In 2004, 38-year-old Patrice Andres, who was a hairdresser, disappeared from her salon. She was found a year and a half later, again dead in Dawson County, Georgia. And that same year, 26-year-old Rosanna Miliana disappeared in North Carolina after telling her father that she was going hiking on the Appalachian Trail. 27-year-old Michael Lewis disappeared in November of 2007 and was found a few weeks later by a fisherman. He'd been packed in black bags and dumped in the Tomoka River. So there are still a lot of things that they are working on tying to Gary Hilton. In all of those disappearances and murders, police were able to find some sort of a tie to Gary. In some cases, he'd been friends with people in the area at the time, and so they knew he was there. In other times, he'd been pulled over in that area, and they had a record of like a speeding ticket. So they were able to put Gary in the area for a lot of these disappearances and murders. Now they just had to try and gather all of the evidence they could. So we're jumping back to January of 2008. They've got Gary in custody, and he sits and he rambles on and on for hours and hours. He says some very disturbing things during that interview, including some strange things about women and hairdressers in particular, which police find interesting because Patrice, one of the women that was murdered earlier, she was a hairdresser. Over the coming weeks, a deal was struck with Gary where he agreed to take the cops to Meredith's body if the prosecution would take the death penalty off of the table. So Gary was charged and he sat in jail awaiting trial. Meredith's family was just kind of left to grieve. At least they did have her remains now. Then Gary was charged with the murder of Cheryl Dunlap in Florida. Gary tried to fight extradition, but he was taken to Leon County and remanded to await trial for killing Cheryl. Prosecutors claimed that Gary abducted Cheryl from the Leon Sinks area and held her captive for 2 days before killing her and then decapitating her body. He then burned her head and her hands here in this fire pit that he built next to her body. You know, he dumped the body there and then he built this fire, and they did find remnants of burning there. The prosecution in Florida had not made a deal with Gary Hilton, and he was found guilty of Cheryl's murder and sentenced to death on February 22, 2011. In 2012, Gary was put on trial for the murders of Jack and Irene Bryant. Again, he struck a deal in exchange for life without parole. Not sure what his motivation was to do that. He was already sentenced to death in Florida, but you know, these guys always think there's a chance they're going to get out. So that was probably the motivation. I mean, hell almighty, the Innocence Project has taken up Scott Peterson's case. Have you guys heard about that? We need to talk about that. I will do a live or something because I'm a little disappointed in the Innocence Project. I am. And so these guys always think there's some way they're going to get out. Gary admitted to killing Irene immediately after crossing paths with the couple, but he kept Jack alive to get his bank details from him. And once he had them, he shot Jack in the head with a .22 Magnum. The court then sentenced Gary Hilton to 4 life sentences for these crimes.
Convicted serial killer Gary Hilton was sentenced in Asheville federal court today for the murders of John and Irene Bryant of Henderson County. Hilton received 4 life sentences and apologized to his victim's family.
No cameras were allowed in federal court Thursday, but this is a look of Gary Hilton being taken back to jail after learning he would spend the rest of his life behind bars.
I wanted to say that he beat my mother to death. He shot my father in the head. He murdered 2 people for no reason other than the trophies of their clothes and the $300 he got from their bank card.
That is Holly Bryant. Last year, Hilton pleaded guilty to killing her parents, John and Irene Bryant, in October of 2007. The couple was hiking in the Pisgah National Forest in Transylvania County. Court records show Hilton admitted to killing Mrs. Bryant there and kidnapping John. Mr. Bryant's remains were found in the Nantahala National Forest in Macon County.
They were wonderful, hardworking people. They were parents of 4 very successful children, and I'm very sorry this happened.
The Bryant's son, Terry, says he's relieved Hilton will not be able to hurt anyone else. He holds on to hope, though, that Hilton will one day be executed.
I can't say anything about it, can't comment on it.
After his sentencing, Hilton's attorneys did not have anything to say on his behalf. But from here, Hilton will go back to Florida, where he's received a death sentence for the murder of a nurse in Florida. He's also serving a life sentence for killing a hiker in North Georgia.
Gary Hilton was sent off to rot, but I want to make sure we talk about something important. You know, here we love to discuss why people do what they do, but we also like to try and take something away from each story, a lesson of some kind. And frustratingly so, the thing we take away from today's story is that everything we know about serial killers does not apply to Gary. I guess there are a few similarities. Gary had a string of failed relationships. He worked odd jobs and sometimes he scammed people. He was definitely a con man of sorts and a lazy one at that. But there are things about Gary Hilton that make us question everything we know about serial killers. First off, he's much older than most serial killers. At 61, he's an anomaly. And that's why most people who have studied this case believe the killings we know about are a continuation of the behavior and not the beginning of the behavior. Gary Hilton didn't just start killing in his late 50s. FBI profiler Clint Van Zandt said, "This guy didn't just wake up and fall off the turnip truck and start doing this." Criminologist Eric Hickey has said he is confident that Gary Hilton's predatory behavior began well before 2007. He said, "It's almost unprecedented to see someone go from zero to what he did. I'd suspect he could be linked to many other crimes." And then there are the differences in victims. As you well know, most serial killers' victims have quite a bit in common. A lot of times they even look alike. Not with Gary Hilton. He killed men, he killed women, he killed old people, he killed young people. He had no victim profile, and that makes him very, very unusual. Some people have said, well, he just killed for money. He killed for their ATM card. Gary could have very easily robbed these people, very easily. He lived in the mountains. He could have put on a ski mask, jumped out from the trails behind a bush with a gun, tied people up, taken their wallets, and left them alive. That is not what he did. In fact, he only used a gun one time that we know of. This guy didn't want to tie people up and take their wallets. He wanted to terrorize them. He wanted to force them to spend time with him. He wanted to terrorize them, and he wanted to kill them. Did you notice as we went through the timeline how he would keep some of them? He always kept them for a few days. It's almost like he was lonely, or what I think is the guy loved the sound of his own voice so much, he wanted a literal captive audience. He likes a stage. He likes a captive audience. He likes to make people listen to him. It's like throughout his life, people just kind of ignored him. He wasn't ever seen as someone that people wanted to get to know. And because he's got this big ego and he's so full of himself, maybe he felt robbed of the opportunity to, share his great thoughts and wisdom with people. I mean, I'll let you decide how you feel about that. But don't you think that that could be a possibility? I could be completely wrong, but he just feels very much to me like someone who wanted a literal captive audience, someone to lord over and force to listen to his ramblings. Eric Hickey, the criminologist, said, "Money was a secondary issue. This was about power. When you consider his comfort in the woods, that is where he felt most powerful, and that's why he killed them where he did. This is systemic behavior with most of these guys. He feels like the world is against him. There's issues of rejection, abandonment. Killing becomes his focus." Another profiler, Joe Davis, who is based in San Diego, said, "Narcissism is not uncommon for such antisocial personality disorders. He likes the attention he's getting. I suspect he wanted the victims to be found. He wants to be heard. He wants to frighten people. He wants to show his power. To him, it's really about having a voice." I liked that when I read that because that's what I was thinking. So I was like, okay, maybe I'm not so far off. Maybe I have actually learned something in all these years studying these guys. We hear these types of things so often in the true crime world. We hear about school shooters that want to be heard, and we hear about men and sometimes women who feel powerless and want to be heard. But while you and I might take to social media to vent or call a therapist or a friend, this small population of people who feel unheard and powerless, just like we all do at times, kill. They kill while most of us find ways to deal with our feelings. That is the difference between them and us. But it is one hell of a difference. Thank you for joining me today on Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you would like to see more from me. It really does help with the algorithm. You can also join my Patreon, and we have a big goal there. We are currently in the midst of raising funds to donate to police departments that have cold case DNA in storage that has never been tested because there's no money. There are thousands of sexual assault kits sitting in refrigeration that have never been tested, and we want to get that kit tested so we can get that perpetrator's DNA and maybe even solve the crime. By joining my Patreon, you keep the videos coming, and you can also help with fundraising. $1 from everybody adds up to a lot of money. I hope you know how much I appreciate you. I say that a lot, but I hope you hear it. I really enjoy talking with you guys, and I appreciate our interaction. I learn a lot from you, and I think we're going to do good things together. Stay safe, my friends, and be kind to each other. And I will see you next time on Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. Bye.